This Chalk Talk is going to be about self-organization. And this is a very high level in the places of intervention for a system. And it's really the power of the ability to be able to be aware that you can self-organize. And that is that you develop the culture and the organization itself from within and out as opposed to top-down or bottom-up. You certainly have to have top-down things like the vision, where we're going, founding principles, things like that, and you have to have bottom-up in terms of buy-in and all the details that need to be into an organization. But the actual definition, the essence of the culture of what we are, is best comes from within. And as I mentioned before, in a previous Chalk Talk, that for Verant, there really was not a culture per se as a single person founder company. And it's essential to develop a culture that is in alignment with founding principles and also able to support and able to innovate the vision and strategy and product roadmap that we have out there that we haven't really been able to get our arms around. And part of that problem is that we need the skills and we need the mindset to do that is in alignment with those founding principles. And that comes from the ability to self-organize. And I think that we have tremendous abilities, not only technical skills, but we have tremendous abilities in this area of self-organization. We just don't know it. At least I don't think we know it. Here's the dilemma, and if we can get past this, I think we really have a good chance of breaking through and making Verant successful. We have to be able to suspend our egos long enough to get what this whole self-organization thing is about so that we can see beyond any blame or persecution or whatever it is, because we can't get in each other's minds, but we have to be able to get to the point where we can communicate to each other how the interdependencies and how the system that we have developed without even knowing a lot about it is what's crippling us. And it's easy to mistake cause and effect, so we have to be very, very careful. As I've mentioned other times, there's this number 3 that comes up quite often in the universe, and in this case, there are 3 phases that typically happen in a process like this. One is to break down and identify what's going on, and essentially get through the denial part, or the denial phase. The second is to then get our arms around what really is going on. What is the cause and effect? What is the problem? And then the third is climbing our way back out again, and that's the message of hope. Now, quite frankly, with me, I usually spend a lot of time on the first one, and if I get to the second phase, that usually ends up going on forever, and we never even see daylight on the third one. So we have to be careful that doesn't happen here, because that can be very destructive and counterproductive, because then we're going to take another step backwards, and we don't want to do that. So we need to have this happen fairly quickly, and if we're not getting it, then we need to just move on. I think that that's really what this comes down to, because we have to be able to self-organize together, and if we can't do that, then the only reasonable response is for people to pick up their marbles and go elsewhere, because you can't force something like this to occur. But we can certainly illustrate it and try our best to see that, just like the Dorothy effect in The Wizard of Oz, we always have had the power to go home. We just didn't know it. So it becomes a matter of how many different I guess experiences do we want to go through to prove that you're not going to get your heart, or your brain and so on from some wizard or what have you, until you can see that you've always had what we need. Now that's a little tricky though in terms of what do we need and what is it that we have and those kind of things. So what happens right now is we have a lot of adaptive responses that we're trying to do the best we can with what we have, I think is the way people phrase it. And that's really, a pretty admirable skill to have. That's what survival is all about. So we can't really knock what we're doing. It's not like we have to say, stop trying to make Verant the best you can, or try to make the best of the situation. Although I think it comes down to that quite often, and so we end up taking more and more things off our plate to where it gets to be a challenge to even figure out what to do at all that we can do to make the best of what we have. Now, just to get some traction into this systems approach to getting our arms around the problem, so to speak, at Verant, I have to both act as a participant and a leader in the company and this outside consultant force. That kind of gives this triumvirate role for me, which is again another 3, by the way. But I need to have this role come in, get some guidance and then get back out again. We're talking like a week or two here, because this is not a very realistic thing for any of us to expect me to have three profoundly different hats. We need to get it down to just very clear that leadership as an ongoing thing, and then I need to be the team player every day. So just to get some traction into this, these are the levels of intervention, and we're going to intervene right down here at this very high level, even though it's low on the page, and that's the mindset. And the goals of the system, or the vision, all that kind of stuff, is going to come from me once the mindset change has taken place in the next week or two. As soon as you start seeing clear evidence of that, and then I'm going to put those goals and so on in place so that we finally have that vision. And I think you'll find that we've always known it, but it's going to be very concise and not commingled with other things that are below here or above the page again. But in order to put in the system incentives, punishment rules, the information flows, the feedback loops, the financial statements, all the details of putting that vision into place, in between there is this self-organization deal. And that's why I'm talking about that, because that's really where I need to then shift into a team player role. I can do this outside consultant here and trying to get us to shift our paradigm. I can be the leader and strictly present the vision and stop there short of execution and measurements and things like that. But then, like I say, I have to be able to start becoming self-organizing myself and join you as teammates, and as we continue to flesh this out. So that's kind of the slippery slope for me, because, okay, so what has happened so far is that by trying to self-organize, because we are good at self-organizing, we have to recognize that, and I think when I'm done with this, you'll see that we do have those skills. But if we're trying to do that down in the different levels of intervention where the more powerful levels have not been resolved yet, then we get some very strange adaptive responses, which are the worst of breed solutions. So coming together, the different pieces end up that we have like the worst case scenario. And that's a very frustrating thing for me to see, and I'm sure other people are just baffled more than frustrated, because they don't understand why their efforts, their valiant efforts, are backfiring, or at least being perceived as backfiring, or whatever is going on. So it's confusing. So it really entrenches the organization further into gridlock, more confusion, and essentially it's due to the deception at the other levels of the system intervention, because we're working off of something that has been tainted. And by deception, again, I want to make sure I've mentioned this before, mentioned again and again, that it's neither negative or positive. It's just saying that we've been deceived, and therefore our ability to make decisions and actions has been tainted, and we can't trust necessarily that we're getting the results that we think we're getting. Okay? That's a systemic problem, not a people problem, but a systemic problem. Quite often what happens then, because of this deception, is that cause and effect get reversed. We think we're turning the knob to the left, which turns the heat down, but it might actually be turning the heat up. We just don't know, and that's the poison well syndrome. You don't know really for sure what's going on, and it's the most dangerous when you really think you're sure, because the label's been there for years that says temperature adjustment, left to go down or right to go up, and therefore you assume that that's the case. What you may not know is that something behind the scenes has actually changed that you don't know about, that has caused a reversal of cause and effect. And it can be just that simple. However, it doesn't do any good to then change the label, because the system behind the scenes is still defective, it's still broken. And if we fix something back there, all of a sudden, now your new label is going to be the deceptive thing, and we don't want to get into those situations. Okay, I think that point should be fairly easy to understand, that we want to fix the root cause and not just put a band-aid by relabeling things or re-understanding things in a different context, because that is just more adaptive responses that builds upon uncertainty and is bound to come back and kick at some point. But there's a more profound point that you might not have picked up on, and that is, in order to do that resolution of changing that label around, for example, so that the knob is actually having the opposite effect of what we thought, is to understand behind the scenes what happened. But for us to understand what's happening behind the scenes at other levels of intervention within the system, We have to use the tools, the devices, the measurements, the evaluation, the information flows, the rules, all those things of our system that we're living in today to make that judgment. And by definition of what I just said, those have been tainted. So we're going to use tainted tools to diagnose something that may or may not be tainted. And those rules, or the tools, by the way, may or may not be tainted. That's the real power. It's kind of like someone who's into domestic abuse or physical violence. It's not the act of hitting that causes the problem. It's the act of not hitting with the threat that causes the profound problem. If it's something as simple as a cause and effect, the human body is amazingly adaptive. I'm not suggesting that we all start endorsing physical violence, but if there is a 100% correlation, it's much easier to adapt by getting away than it is to try to have it become this mind game. So it's the threat, it's the unknown, it's the uncertainty that causes this problem and gives us a false sense of security when we think that we're understanding something, but we just don't know. And that can be quite unnerving. So that makes this a little bit scary, and that's really, in a sense, what a wicked problem is. It's something that has been self-inflicted, can only be fixed by the one who inflicted it, and the one who can fix it is wholly unaware that they're the one that broke it and can fix it. So that's us. That's what makes a problem wicked. Does that kind of make sense? It's a chalk talk. We'll assume you said yes. Okay. Are we aware? Are you aware that this is what you do and what I do and each of us do every day at Verant? We are doing those things where we are trying to use compensatory behaviors by turning the knob the opposite way because that's the best we understand the system as it is. And then when it flip-flops, we then flip-flop our compensatory behavior. And that's called an oscillation in a system. We call it here, I believe, a roller coaster. We want to be careful because there's a roller coaster of change in systems dynamics, and there's a roller coaster in innovation that are considered normal and natural cycles. And that's why we want to be careful we don't use that roller coaster in a third way, a third definition, as something completely negative. And I guess there's a fourth, there's a bipolar cycle as well. So we're kind of mashing all into this thing called a roller coaster. I think we have to be very, very careful of that because they're very different meanings, very different definitions. And some of those processes are very natural and normal, and they need to be understood, not viewed as something as positive or negative, just as a way of life. Okay? But the delays in a feedback cycle, in a feedback loop, are the one thing that is very difficult to perceive at an individual level unless you look back at a systems level. But if the delay from the time you find out that your compensatory behavior of turning the knob the other way is now reversed again, if there's a significant delay in there, then you're going to be introducing downstream additional deception until you've caught up with the new deception coming to you. So that ripple effect, guess what, is going to cause, eventually, it's going to loop back up around above and beyond you and cause another ripple oscillation to come down. And it starts becoming out of control, most likely, because it's either going to dampen all the way down to zero, which means we're going to kill something that needs to have some type of pattern or some type of cycle that needs to have sustenance, like a sales cycle or a new product line will get squeezed down to nothing, or something will go out of control, like perhaps spending or investment into some program or initiative that keeps expanding rather than concluding. So those are the unintended consequences that we think we might have our arms around because it seems to be reasonably related, cause and effect, to this knob we're turning, but you just don't know because you're dealing with tainted and deceptive cause and effect, which could be or may not be reversed, and it's been delayed. So that's what makes it really difficult. So are you aware that you can't be blamed for doing these things? I didn't say you shouldn't or you may not, but you can't be blamed. It's called survival. It's what we do. It's what we do is being alive. And it's the only thing you can do given the construct of a wicked problem. If it's not wicked, you have a chance to fiddle with that knob enough, figure it out, use your survival skills, and we'll probably come out okay. It'll just be, a little ugly, a little inefficient, and But you survive through those things all the time, every day. We all do. But when it becomes wicked, there is no other choice. The only choice you have is to further entrench yourself, unless we can find a way to find out that the mindset, the paradigm, is what is really going on here. So it's a set up to fail archetype in systems theory, but it is always doomed, and this will be doomed even though you're using your survival skills to survive. But all survival skills do is buy you time. It doesn't fix the problem. And it's time that the problem gets fixed. Why? Because the reality of the system in terms of our environment, as in the economic environment and paychecks and things like that, at some point fails itself. And that's unforgiving and relentless. Not like a system that we are doing here where it's business planning and our interpretation of events, but at some point it really will become doomed and fail. And that point is getting fairly close. But you have the power right now, all of us do, each of us do, is to transcend and self-organize on top of this. But we have to be very cautious. It's a very simple but yet foreign and difficult thing to do. And the solution here is really a Eureka in the bathtub moment. We need to have a breakthrough in our own thought patterns, our own mindset that is going to say, ah, I think I get it, and then be able to articulate what it is to each other. And if we're reasonably all on the same page where we're having that Eureka moment, then I think we're home free at that point. We have to keep each other accountable to that Eureka moment, but then we need to start down that levels of intervention and start untainting things, so to speak. And you do that by just rounding the wagons and looking at the goals of the system, the rules, the structure, so on, all the way down there, and just revalidating what's going on to make sure it's all congruent and all is in lockstep with each other. So that, I think, can happen, but it's not going to happen without that Eureka moment. If we just start with the goals and then start the rules and so on, it's not going to unwickify it, especially if we go randomly and try to change financial structures and look at feedback loops and then look at rules and then go to other kind of feedback loops. It's going to be so commingled that it will become super wickified, and there is no answer to that. We have to also be careful of our egos, because we need to have our egos suspended long enough to see that this is our problem, my problem, your problem, but it's close to getting to blame there, because it's a matter of understanding this, but I can't blame you any more than you can blame me. But without some type of specifics here, then it doesn't get any traction, doesn't go anywhere, it becomes too generic. But what happens if we blame or condemn the actual skills that people are using as part of these adaptive responses? If I say that you're mopping the floor, and there's a problem with that, it's going to be counterproductive to attack the mop or your mopping skills. That is not what it is, even though if we don't say some of those things, it becomes just too elusive, because you can't abstract something out of nothing. So we need to have some examples that we can abstract out the patterns, the behaviors, and from that abstract out this mindset. And that can't be something that I just tell you, because then it's going to be my mindset that I'm telling you. And I don't think that's going to be any more productive than you telling me what your mindset is in isolation. We need to get all of our paradigms on the same page, and there's going to have to be a certain amount of sharing in terms of where our current mindsets are at. But I think that that is a group activity and not the purpose of my talk here. Okay? We have to be careful that we, again, don't attack the people or the skills or the activities, even though we're going to have to identify some of those, because it's going to also ensure failure, because we're going to cut ourselves off at the knee. And we've seen examples of this indirectly where something isn't going well, and all of a sudden we're out of that line of business. We just stop doing that. And we become smaller and smaller in terms of our world, and we become less and less effective, because we get less and less done each day because of this damned if you do, damned if you don't, being cut off at the knees syndrome. And I get that. But do you get that that's part of our problem? That's in your head? That's the way that you had to adapt in order to survive in something that was maladaptive to begin with? We can rewind this back to, I think, where the problem occurred, and we're going to do that. But it's not going to change anything unless we figure out that we have built our own culture, our own mindsets here, that is a status quo that never existed. So we need to reinvent ourselves between our ears in that mindset. It's not the skill, it's not the people. Let's just go back to that mopping example. Let's say we have customers slipping. We're running a grocery store. And we have customers slipping in the entryway because it gets mopped right at 10 o'clock in the morning, just as the doors are open for the day. I guess that's a kind of a strange grocery store, but let's say that we're a clothing store and we're open at 10 a.m. And right about then, the floor is sopping wet. What do? It's probably not a good thing to have people slip. So we can have, put up signs. I suppose we can put down mats, or we can, blame the person mopping the floor. But the person mopping the floor may be just wants clean floors because the floor is always dirty every time they open the doors for the customers, and they're embarrassed. They want the clean floor. You can't knock them for that, but they probably shouldn't be doing it right at 10 o'clock. But what if they can't even get to the mops because the doors for the employees don't open until 9:55, and they want to have the best job they can do, but in 5 minutes, that's not enough time to get things mopped and dried off. So that's their adaptive response. But we don't want to blame the mop. We don't want to blame the mopper. Do we want to blame the policy? You could. How about the supervisor? How about the person opening the employee door? How about the person setting the hours of the company? I don't know. How about just communications? We have bad communications. How about the rules of the company? How about the culture? I don't know. All those things can be blamed. But we don't know because we don't know where the problem lies. All we know for sure is the easiest thing to do is to fix the problem at the mop or moppee level and hope that that helps. And all it's going to do is have the person discouraged, and they're going to just do whatever they're supposed to do, like maybe mop the floors, at the end of the day, or I don't know. I mean, whatever the proper quote-unquote response is, it probably is not going to have the same desirable effect that this person is attempting to do as best as they can given the conditions of the environment. Now, what's unfortunate is we are on a very, very tight schedule, so I don't have the time to go through some of these explanations in enough detail like I will down the road when we actually learn systems thinking. But if you can imagine, if we're fixing the mopping problem by changing the policy and saying, like, you shall not mop the floor at 10 o'clock in the morning, then you're going to end up with a policy that is not in alignment with maybe the rules where, the mop closet is only open from 10 to 10:30. I don't know. There's something else that's going to be messed up. So then we have to go fix that. But if you have problems with feedback loops, maybe this never even gets back to the mopper. It's something that happens in the office and on paper, and the supervisor, everybody feels good about it, but nobody communicates it to the mop person. All sorts of crazy things can happen because we're trying to, flip-flop a cause and effect because we think it's wrong, but we're not really sure of all the other ones that have been flip-flopped. So by flip-flopping one of them, there's this domino effect where the other ones that have interdependencies also may or may not flip-flop depending on their adaptive natural response to something. And that is that without actually intentionally changing it, there's going to be some natural unintended consequences of that cause and effect that are going to take place because we're up against the real world. So you can't force, for example, a door to be locked and unlocked simultaneously. So if you have policies that are conflicting, somehow that's going to get worked out in the reality zone. It's not going to say, oh, we have two overlapping policies that have an indeterminate state because it wants it to be both locked and unlocked. I can guarantee you, at least in my world, that it's going to be one or the other. Reality will prevail. And then that looks the most real, which it is, but you will assume then whatever's closest to it in terms of a real or tangible connection, the policy, the person, the key, whatever it is, you can see that cause and effect very clearly. And it probably has nothing to do with it. It's just a natural manifestation of an unintended consequence of your goofy system that you've created. And by you, I mean us, okay? So you don't know if you have success, you don't know if you have failure, you don't know what you have a bunch of goo. You're just turning knobs wildly like one of the little busy boxes that a kid has in the passenger seat. It can be great fun, and you can make lots of funny noises and honks and flip the knobs and all that, but it's not a lot of fun when it's your livelihood and your company, and you're trying to just get an understanding of where you have success, don't have success, and where we're moving in the same direction as each other. Okay, so again, the way you do that is you find the proper level of intervention in the system, and then you work down and let things kind of tumble down on their own. We don't have to be overly aggressive in fixing things. The rules of the system, for example, I don't know that we have to go in there and attack each one. What we need to do is get the goals of the system put in place, which we'll do this week, next week. Get the self-organization going where we have this manifestation of the mindset change. And from that, I don't know that we have to have a group exercise and look at the way one person processes orders or answers the phone. They need to be given a chance to readapt with their natural self-organizing skills, but now they're going to readapt to something that is consistent above them. So their goals, their above vision that's being presented to them for execution has a fighting chance of not being tainted itself. But we don't need to all come in to help them do that. Each person really knows their own area. I think we need to hold people accountable. We need to look at it, but we need to have a little bit of time elapse so these things can settle out and dampen out on their own. But they will not do that without some pretty strong intervention, because there is a very strong status quo that causes inertia. So inertia will set into a system again, which is going to realign it to its original dysfunctional state. And that's because a status quo has power, and there are more benefits than there are disbenefits. What's the opposite? In that status quo resurfacing, because it has adapted itself. So it may be dysfunctional and it may be headed for doom, but we all like it to a certain extent, more so than we would like the alternative, which is nothing really in the trap mode. So that's kind of the little bit of a riddle there, because we don't see that there are any other choices. Therefore, this must be a good choice. All right. Kind of a weird thing, huh? So you get it? It's not the policy. It's not the procedure. It's not the communication. It's not the rules. It's all of these. It's the system, and the system is an interconnectedness, not only of all of the elements we're thinking about, like policies for how to build products and roles and responsibilities and all our bookshelves and all that kind of stuff, customers. It's also, guess what? The rules of intervention are also interdependent and interwoven with all the things I just mentioned. But the difference here is that this is a structured hierarchy, and it's pretty reliable that it really is that way, so that if you've come down the hierarchy, you're not going to get stuck into spaghetti junction where everything relates to everything and you can't figure out where to get traction. This will work. Now, there has to be change and improvements all the way down that line, but they're not the root cause. So that's really what I was saying earlier, is we have to make sure we understand the root cause, and I am not positive the root cause is the mindset, but I'm pretty sure, and it will flesh itself out very quickly. And that's why I can't be specific what I'm looking for or what anybody else is looking for this Eureka moment or this insight, but it's going to be pretty clear. And if it's not, then either we're not getting our arms around the mindset, or the problem exists elsewhere. But there really isn't any elsewhere to go at this point, because we have. This is getting a little longer than I anticipated, but the problem I have is if I do this interactively, that's the best way to communicate, is a two-way communication, right, face-to-face. But it's very difficult for me to have the distance of being that Jonah, of being that advisor, and not getting sucked into my own experience around these things, and then becoming just entrapped in that. I think that is a very real risk that we have consistently fallen into. And I do mean we, because it's your guys' responsibility also to hold me accountable to making sure that I know if I'm being an advisor or I'm being part of the team here trying to solve this riddle. But without exception, I think I get sucked into that. So that's why I'm trying to make sure these points are as clear as I can make them, and then I'm going to let go of them, because if this doesn't work, then it's not going to really help to sit around and talk this type of stuff face-to-face beyond maybe an hour or two. It becomes too trapping. So it's that level of intervention, it's that mindset, it's the interconnectedness and self-awareness that has caused, or the self-awareness of the predicament that we are in, that has caused both the problem and will be the solution. They are very close to each other. But the issue for me right now is the self-discovery, the self-awareness of self-organization has long been paralyzed as I'm trying to convince people of this problem. So if you think there's something else going on, great, but we don't really have time for that debate. We've tried those things, so this is really all hands on deck. We need to deal with this right here and right now.